I was recently privileged to join a group of podcasters from the UK and discuss the changes that they've seen in agriculture and the food system in their time as podcasters.
Also, there's a girl on there who was an engineer, and after listening to the episode about the miller is missing, she became a miller. One farmer shifted his system. They were growing commodity grains, and now they have their own farm shop where they mill their own flour and bake their own bread and sell to their local community.
They had all kinds of insights and advice for those looking to continue the process of leading change in our food system.
There's a huge amount of resilience within the farming community and within the very exciting regen ag space. So sort of keep going, keep innovating.
All that and more on this episode 526 of the Working Cows podcast, brought to you by Dominium Wealth, 100th Meridian Ranching, the South Dakota Grassland Coalition, and Kip Fladland Horsemanship.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. It's Clay Connery, host of the Working Cows podcast. Very excited to be able to share with you a conversation that I had on the 6 Inches of Soil podcast. Now, I've shared with you an episode of 6 Inches of Soil before. Richard Tufton and Claire Mackenzie facilitated a conversation between Gabe Brown and Temple Grandin. And this time they invited me to come on the show and join a group of ag podcasters from around the UK who've been podcasting, I think every one of them, maybe longer than I have. So it was pretty cool to get their perspective. And honestly, it's a different scenario, as we say, across the pond, different scenario that they're facing as far as the food system, the way the food system works there, the brokenness of the food system, the health of the food system, all those things are just different there. And so it's good to get their perspective, and then also to just see the different ways that they're thinking about the path forward. So look forward to sharing this conversation with this group right now.
Welcome, listeners, to a really special episode of 6 Inches of Soil, the podcast, which is really a collaboration episode. We've figured that there are a few awesome podcasts in this space who are kind of doing similar things, but approaching it from different angles. And it'd be a really good idea to get everybody together to share their approaches to the mission that we're all on. And so we've got Meet the Farmer, we've got Farmerama, we've got Farmgate, we've got Working Cows. To start things off, Abby, do you want to introduce yourself and how you're connected to this space?
Sure, yeah. I'm Abby Rose. I got involved in farming when my dad moved to Chile and started farming when I was about 18, 19. So that was really my unexpected introduction to farming, to be honest. I wasn't interested at all before that. But being on the farm, really learned just how challenging farming is and how exciting it is, and just how important it is as well. So all of that really brought me on board. And then I got excited about understanding what all the other farmers out there are doing, and particularly those who were moving in a more ecological direction. Started in 2015. So at that time, we weren't really using the word regenerative, but certainly we were talking about small-scale farmers and farmers who were building ecology on their farms. And that was why we started Farmerama back in the day. We just celebrated our 10th birthday. So maybe that's enough for me for now.
Well, congrats. It's a really wonderful podcast, and we'll come into more detail about it later, but it's one of my favorites for sure. Ffinlo, how about you? Why don't you explain who you are, how long you've been doing it, you're connected in this space?
So I'm the producer, host of Farmgate, and we've been doing this since about 2020. And I mean, my background into farming more broadly, was through politics and environmentalism, I suppose. And it was this sort of desperate realization that there was a nature and climate crisis and that we needed to solve this thing. But the thing that really mattered, the thing that mattered more than anything else was food and farming, because without food and farming, we are nothing. And food and farming is unique in that it is not just a problem in terms of climate and nature, but it's also a solution. And not only that, it can be an enormous solution. And so the podcast I'd worked in food radio before, and food radio is fantastic because you can cook on the radio and you can do the most incredible recipes, and nobody can see if you get it wrong. You can just say it tastes fantastic, and people just assume you're telling the truth. But I'm a nosy Parker, I guess, and I like to know what people are up to. And so the podcast was a way, it just gave me an excuse to talk to people I wouldn't necessarily have an excuse to talk to otherwise, and to bring people together that I wouldn't necessarily have a reason to put together, or who wouldn't necessarily have a reason to talk to each other. And so within that sort of space of food farming and the environment, I can bring people together. I can chat to people I think are really interesting, and I can just continue learning and finding out more, and share that learning and finding out with other people who are listening in.
Yeah, and when did your pod launch?
In 2020. And we launched just at the time when GWP Star came out. So the metric that Miles Allen had developed, which more accurately captured the nature of methane and the way that it operated in terms of global warming. And so that was one of our very first podcasts. And obviously that had a very good response, and we moved on from there. And at the time I was the director of a think tank called Farmwell. We were working a lot with government, on that sort of post-Brexit package. And I can't take any responsibility for the nitty-gritty and the things that went wrong later on, because, we were very much involved in the sort of the bigger, the umbrella stuff, the sort of conversation about what farming could be. But the podcast grew out of that. It was a way of communicating what we were talking about.
Yeah. Well, it's really important stuff, and the content you have is really strong. How about you, Ben? Tell us a bit about you and your pod and how long you've been doing it.
Let's take a quick break and hear a word from our sponsor today, Dominium Wealth.
Hey, it's Nick Costco of Dominium-Wealth.com. Did you hear me on episode 490 talking about how the infinite banking concept empowers you to take control of your money? Are you curious how your fellow ranchers are capitalizing on this concept? Did it leave you with some questions? You can get those questions answered at the Western Sustainability Exchange's Expanded Markets Conference, September 13th through the 15th in Columbus, Montana. I will be doing a breakout session there where we can dive into your questions. For more information on this event, check the show notes or visit westernsustainabilityexchange.org.
Well, firstly, thanks so much for having me, and it's great to be on with this fantastic group of podcasters. I'm now a full-time podcast producer. I've been full-time for about 3 years, but I've been podcasting not quite as long as Abby. I think Meet the Farmers started back in 2016 for its first episode. But I've been podcasting since then, and the journey has sort of developed. I'm now based in Norwich, but I have previous lives both on my family's farm in Essex, on the Essex coast, and in the conservation sector as well before that. I founded Rural Pod Media, which is our sort of podcast agency, in 2022 as a way of telling rural and farming stories, really. And I mean, Meet the Farmers itself it's probably broader in scope than certainly sort of Abby and Ffinlo's work. I think we go more sort of beyond. The idea is on Meet the Farmers, no matter what type of farming you are, wherever in the world, sort of like to have a space for everything. Even though probably personally, I have more of an interest in the regenerative space, and I'd definitely like to profile those stories and the subjects surrounding them as well. But no, so I suppose, I'm now working with around a dozen different brands in various capacities, doing podcasting in different ways. Meet the Farmers, and then Meet the Farmers also generated a spin-off ongoing series called The Big Debate about 6 months ago or so. I mean, that's hosted by farmers Sophie Gregory and Ali Hunter-Blair. So it's been a bit of a journey. And I think podcasting, which I'm really looking forward to this discussion today, it's always developing. Oh my goodness, you have to keep up with so much. And we're now talking about video, and podcasting has moved in all sorts of areas. So it's a really exciting space. But lots to talk about today, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, we're really thrilled that you're joining us. Before I come on to Claire, who's going to be producer and also guest on the show, how about you, Clay? Let's go across the pond to you. How are you connected in this world? Tell us a bit about your pod, how long you've been doing it.
Yeah, so been running the Working Cows podcast since November of 2017, so just about 8.5 years now, and focusing on finding people who are successful in ranching, I know I'm the odd man out here, but farming west of the 100th meridian, I guess we could just say it that way. People who are financially successful, people who are successful in managing people who are successful in managing land, and people who are successful in managing animals. When we get all four of those pillars working well together, we can generate generational wealth in terms of soil health, in terms of financial health, in terms of people and their relationships. We can still have Christmas together as a family, even though we're engaged in a family business together. That's a real concern. There are people whose families and their connection to each other is lost because the ranch business, the farm business is struggling, and that puts stress on them, and then they go their separate ways. And that's a tragedy in my view. I'm trying to produce content that gives people tools that can help them avoid that. That's been my journey and my goal over the years.
Yeah, well, it's a really good pod and one that I regularly listen to. So nice job with all that. And what about you, superstar producer Claire Mackenzie? Where do you fit into the mix?
Well, I think this, for me personally, is the most fabulous way of being able to explore the subjects we couldn't do in the film. And now we're producing other shorts, etc. It's just more economical the way we do it. I think most of us here, I don't know about Farmerama or Clay, but recording on Riverside on these virtual studios enables us. And what I've loved working with Rich is that we try and go across the pond as much as possible, or even more globally, bringing guests together. And I've really loved the conversations we're having. Rich and I will allude to our silly story of meeting later, but really enjoying working. And also Richard's your deep passion and connection to the subject over in the US has opened doors that I thought I'd talk to people I'd never thought I'd talk to. So it's just really exciting to have you guys here. Is all phenomenal. All of your podcasts helped my research making the film. So thank you, everyone. Definitely start with Farmerama, Meet the Farmers, and then Ffinlo. And all of you have helped us. And Clay, obviously not quite as much because it was a British subject, but all of the US stuff has influenced us hugely. So thank you for being here.
Totally here to all of that. I'll start by framing my involvement. I mean, I've been in the meat space for about 25 years, the space between buying live animals from the farm all the way through to producing food in restaurants and then supermarkets. And that connection is so interesting to me because there's also such a huge disconnect, right? There are so many people out there that think milk generally just comes from a bottle, or meat, you go get it from the butcher, but there's no real connection to the full story of what farms and farmers out there are doing. And I think this is a really good medium to help try to break down those educational barriers. And I've been incredibly lucky in my career to meet some amazing people. One of the reasons we do 6 Inches of Soil is to try to bring the voices of these experts together to try to help people understand the connection between their everyday lives through the food they're eating and where that food comes from and the impact and the signals that sends to the farming world. My question, Ben, you can start with this. Like, what have been your biggest learnings and takeaways? All of us on this episode have met some amazing people on our journey. So it'd be really interesting to share what some of your biggest learnings have been now you've had all this knowledge.
Yeah, I think it's an amazing one, isn't it? It is such a privilege to get an insight into such a diversity of different people's lives, let alone their businesses and their farms and their approaches, but also their ways of thinking. And often I find the conversations that you have when the microphone isn't on are just as interesting as those that are. And I often think, wish we could broadcast those to the world as well. But I think often, and there are reflections of podcasting actually in this as well. I think the big one is keep going, that actually there's a huge amount of resilience. There is a huge amount of that out there within the farming community and within the very exciting regen ag space. So sort of keep going, keep innovating, which again is another reflection within the podcast space. Things change, things stay the same, but they also change as well. And those innovators out there, I also find a great privilege to actually get an insight into those innovations. And farmers who share tend to be, in my view, the farmers who are really going places and are really innovating their own businesses, but also helping others to innovate as well. And I think the third one is farmers who stay curious. Stay curious to those around them. And I think that's, again, something that we can all learn, whether we're farming or not, is actually stay curious to the world. Get out there, see what's going on, and really bring those lessons home.
Yeah, I think that's definitely right, especially when you get into those rural communities. People are always looking over the hedge to see what's going on. Equally, that can be challenging if you're trying to do something different. I liked through listening to your pod, Ben, that you learn why they're doing the things that they're doing and why are they growing these weird and wonderful cover crops that are pretty unusual for that area. Clay, what about you? You've met some amazing pioneers, especially I would argue that agriculture in the States is even, well, probably the most industrial in the world in terms of the efficiencies of producing as much food as possible for the cheapest cost of the food, but at what cost? Like, what's the bigger cost? And so you tend to find pioneers who are extra brave because they're really doing something different. What have been some of your biggest learnings over your career?
Let's take a quick break and hear a word from our sponsor today, 100th Meridian Ranching. My dad always said he wished there was a shot he could give bulls to make them take a 9-month nap. At 100th Meridian Ranching, they have something like that through their bull leasing program. Think about it. You could skip the bull sale, the risk of injured bulls, and the headache of year-round feeding, all while having access to bulls that fit your environment. They have over 500 to choose from in Black Angus, Red Angus, Charolais, and Hereford. This can improve your cash flow, grow your margins, and keep your operation flexible. The bulls are delivered right when you need them, so they aren't standing around eating unnecessary feed, tearing each other up, or your facilities. I leased a bull from them. They were great to work with and sent me a bull with genetics that didn't require a mixer wagon to stay fleshy. He truly was one of the most Bonsma-type bulls I've ever seen in person. Find 100th Meridian Ranching on Facebook or Instagram, visit 100thmeridianranching.com, or give Lane a call to find out more. Yeah, I think that I would echo a lot of what Ben said, but also the willingness, and it is part connected to what he said, but the willingness of people to share. Like, when I started out, I had no platform. Nobody knew who I was. Nobody had no reason for anybody to say yes. And just time after time, like, really, there's only been a couple of people who've ever legitimately flat out turned me down and said, no, I won't do it. And one of them was a cover crop pioneer. And he said, I want to have conversations with people in person on their farm because I think that's what produces more lasting change. And I'm like, fair enough. That's your philosophy. That's fine. And really, honestly, he's the only one who's just flat out said, no, I won't do it, and never changed his mind. Others have said no at first and then come back around. So it's just the willingness of these people to share. And I think it's because they're motivated by whatever threats they understand exist to farming, to ranching. They are motivated to help people overcome those things that become threats to their families, to the businesses, to the landscapes. When a landscape like the one I'm sitting in the middle of today has been well managed for generations, there is a benefit to turning that green side down, turning it black and farming it. There is a bump of productivity that comes from that for the first couple of years, and then obviously the soil loss and all the other issues kick in. It's valuable to keep families like this continuing to operate these landscapes. I think everybody understands that's the goal, and so they're, whatever their motivation is, they're interested in helping. And so it's just been really a testimony to people's willingness to just come and share what they've learned and help other people learn so that they can avoid some of the same mistakes. And I think that's been the biggest key to what I've been able to do, is people's willingness to share their expertise.
Yeah, and the more that the stories get out there, the more people start to engage with where food comes from and how farming works. It's a really powerful way to empower the rural community to get more connected to where the food is being eaten. And Abby, I just finished re-listening to Cereals, your amazing series, and the way that you tell stories is insane. It's so engaging and wonderful. And honestly, you've changed my life and the way that I buy bread off the back of listening to that, and just understanding how little I knew about something which I eat every day, which I was out there in the meat world saying, I fully understand where meat comes from and what the breeds are and what they've eaten. And I really know my food. And I listened to your series and I realized that I have a sandwich every day for lunch, right? And I knew nothing about bread, nothing. Anyway, tell us about the things that what have been your key takeaways that you've learned?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say, like, I felt exactly the same when I first realized how the whole world of grains, it was just such, we're all engaging with it so much. It's almost like it becomes hidden or invisible. I was sourcing my tomatoes well, but I had no idea about where my cereals were coming from, and hadn't even thought about it. So that cereal series was one of the kind of key moments of learning for me. Well, one, it opened my eyes to the whole world of grains, and the people who were thinking differently about it. So we both looked at, the commodity grain system, and how that works, and maybe how it's coming to the end of its reasonable lifetime, as in making flour that has zero nutritional value. Maybe that doesn't make sense. Maybe it made sense as we were getting to that point, but now we've got to a point where actually, could we ask some different questions? Maybe we want to do it slightly differently. And so talking to the people who are doing it slightly differently and asking those questions, that was the UK focused community. But actually the other side to it, which is more like a podcasting or storytelling viewpoint on it, is that, so 6 years on, we just did this bit of research and going back and asking, because many people wrote into us similar to you, saying like, I'd never thought about this. I'm changing my life. I've changed career. I'm doing this now. And so that was amazing at the time, but we didn't really take it any further. So 6 years on, we went back and recontacted some of those people and recorded their stories. And we've just released a podcast called Cereal Revisited. It's just one episode, but it tells some of the stories of people whose lives have completely changed. One farmer who shifted his system. They were growing commodity grains, and now they have their own farm shop where they mill their own flour and bake their own bread and sell to their local community, something they hadn't ever conceived of. And also how that affected their mental health as well. So things like that. And then also there's a girl on there who was an engineer, and after listening to the episode about the miller is missing, she became a miller. And now she's a miller in Nottingham. So that's a pretty radical life change. And also, not many people at school are like, oh, maybe I'll become a miller. Because it's not one of those things that's in our heads as a career or vocation. My final reflection is that the other insight that came out from talking to both the original contributors to Cereal and people who had listened and shifted their ways was just how powerful it is to tell this interlinked, interconnected story about a system. You started with what even is bread, and then how do you breed and come up with these seeds? What are some of the restrictions there? And then what are the farmers doing? What are the millers doing? What are the bakers doing? And then also, what about people eating it? So you really saw the whole system in one, and it wasn't like a hero's journey narrative. It was an interlinked, connected narrative that really took people along the whole way. And the number of people who reflected, oh, I saw myself in the system for the first time. Like, oh, as a baker, suddenly I understood it wasn't just flour, water, and salt that I was putting together and making bread. I was actually, by the flour I was choosing, completely shifting what was growing in the fields, shifting what people bred. And so it brought a new level of meaning to each of the individual roles. And for me, that was like when I started to understand that, I got really excited, and I would love to be able to do more of that going forward. And I think it's something that all of us is lacking in our society in general, is like just the power of that systemic storytelling. And how can we do more of it? And particularly on the land, these stories are complex. So we can't always focus on one person to tell them. So yeah, those are some of my early reflections.
Yeah. And also this idea of really understanding the truth about food and where it comes from, and what your perception is when you're buying and eating something is it often can be very different to the reality. I mean, here in the States, we have big feedlots, feed yards, where picture 30,000 head of cattle in one gigantic car park. And some of those are organic. They're feeding them organic grains and corns. But when you're buying that organic beef in the supermarket, you're definitely not picturing in your mind this huge feed yard. and things like that. That's a big part of my mission, is to try to help people truly understand, to make sure that the values that they truly believe in match where their food is coming from and the signals they're sending out. Yeah. So anyway, I just think that there's still, and there will always be a disconnect, especially as we've gone from such a local system. I mean, I was at a grain mill here in Austin, Texas last week, and he had up on the wall all these little sacks from history. Each little town used to have its own grain mill, and they all had their own brand. And on the wall is just all of these multiple different brands. And now, of course, none of those mills exist. They've all been centralized, and the distance from the farmer to the person eating the bread is larger than it's ever been. So anyway, it's just, I think it's really good that you can break down these barriers. Ffinlo, how about you? I mean, obviously you're well focused in the kind of news and current affairs aspect of the industry. What have some of your biggest takeaways been through your making of the pod?
Let's take a quick break and hear a word from our sponsor today, the South Dakota Grassland Coalition. Learn how to increase your stocking rates, extend your grazing season, increase plant diversity, retain moisture in your soil, spend less time and money on weed control, and much more at one of the South Dakota Grassland Coalition's grazing schools. During this 3-day intensive program, area producers, along with presenters from state and local agencies, combine hands-on activities in the field with classroom-style presentations to walk you through the steps necessary to create a grazing plan that suits your unique operation. Reserve your spot at one of their grazing schools today at sdgrass.org.
You've come to me last, so everybody's said lots of things. But when I was living in Scotland, there was a farmer that lived adjacent to where I was living, and he dug a hole in the field. And I didn't know why he dug a hole in the field. I'm not convinced that he knew why he dug a hole in the field. But what I noticed was that every other farmer in the vicinity dug a hole in the field fairly shortly afterwards. And so it's this idea of looking over the hedge and the way in which actually that hedge has become a set of headphones and a microphone. And, you know, through the podcast, through other people's podcasts, farmers can now look over a hedge which is on the other side of the country and on the other side of the world, and really sort of learn from the best. And I think that, you know, that's one of the really important things. So, you know, some of the conversations that I most enjoy are those where I've got farmers, you know, on talking to each other about the things that they're doing, the learnings that they've had, the way that they've gone from farming pretty intensively to, you know, often through some sort of crisis or other, to then finding regenerative agriculture and becoming more resilient and happier, you know, as a result, more economically sustainable. But one of the big things, I suppose, over the course of the last few years is the idea that soil is a great big tent, and you know, it's something that unites so many different people. And, you know, a decade or so back, maybe 15 years ago, I did a lot of work with the UK Conservative Party around climate change. And at the time on climate change, there were literally 5 Tory MPs who would stand up and say, yeah, we believe in climate change as a clear and present danger. And so we did a lot of work with those MPs trying to work out why and what the impediments were. And a lot of it was to do with the rhetoric around it and the way that the left seemed to own the issue. The Conservatives hadn't found their place in it. And so we would reframe the language and work with those MPs to try and reframe the language to frame it around values rather than just campaigns, or, you know, and farming was part of that. It was, you know, things that mattered to Conservative MPs. So it was security, and water and flooding in the constituency, those sorts of things. And suddenly that meant that more and more Conservatives were able to find their way into that climate change tent, as it was at the time. And so, you know, just sort of 5 years later, there were probably fewer than 5 Conservative MPs who would have stood up and said that climate change wasn't a clear and present danger. So that was a big thing. But in terms of farming, soil is there. And for me, you know, one of my really big interests these days is national security and global security in the face of climate and nature breakdown. And soil is the way that we solve this. And it's Peter Bick, who produced Roots So Deep, the fantastic film, who sort of talks about soil being a big tent. And through that tent, there are lots of different flaps, lots of different doors. And if you have all the farmers and all the natural capital people and all the land agents sort of all going in basically through a door on one side of the tent, that's fine. But it doesn't mean that raises the agenda, raises the importance of food and farming farming up that political agenda, because in the UK, as you know, the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, it's right down the bottom. It has one of the smallest budgets. It's where ministers start off before being moved elsewhere. And yet it ought to be one of the top ones, along there with Foreign Affairs and Home. And so it's finding other flaps into that tent. And for me, national security, and part of that is food security and ecological security. That's a really big flap. And so that's where a lot of our work at the moment is in helping people to find that national security flap. Because in getting people to come into that big tent in different directions, suddenly food and farming and soil becomes a much bigger issue. So I guess I'm not quite sure if that answers the question of takeaways, but that's sort of where we are. And I think that key takeaway, that soil is something that affects everybody, even if they don't know it. And we can find ways of making sure that people understand that better. And suddenly food and farming becomes the most important thing in the world.
Yeah, 100%. And you think about what King Charles said in Congress a couple of weeks ago. He said, we ignore at our peril the fact that these natural systems, in other words, nature's own economy, provide the foundation for our prosperity and our national security. I'm so glad that he went to the heart of Washington, D.C. and said that line. That made me feel really proudly British here in Austin, Texas. But that was great to try and get. There are so many threads that affect it. How about you, Claire? Do you feel like you're making a difference? Ffinlo's talking about, influencing all these different aspects.
Let's take a quick break and hear a word from our sponsor today, Kip Fladland Horsemanship. I was recently able to attend one of Kip Fladland's horsemanship clinics, and let me tell you, the experience was phenomenal. I took 3 of my kids along. We all took our own horses, and there was 8 or 10 other people in each of the classes. We did the groundwork class and the fundamentals of horsemanship class, the riding portion. And you just learn so much from everybody else that's there. You learn so much from Kip himself, of course, and hearing him coach other people. He's got great quality audio, which I know I appreciated. I'll just say it. But you could hear him in all of his interactions with other people and learn from him teaching them as well. So can't recommend it highly enough. Kip also rides horses for the public. He had a few of them there that he was putting through their paces and working with during the clinic itself and giving examples of how to do what he's asking people to do during that. So even when he's out on the road, he's available to ride horses for the public. And then he also rides when he's home. So just really, really appreciated it. I've ridden horses my whole life, and I learned so much just being there about how to get a horse to do things that I've seen other people do, but didn't know it was possible to get even a horse that I was riding was 20 years old and get him to do some of those things. Even at his advanced age, he was still learning with me and doing things that Kip was asking us to get those horses to do. So, huge endorsement recommendation of a Kip Fladland horsemanship clinic. If you have the opportunity, you can find the schedule at kfhorses.com.
I might bring it down a little. But Ffinlo, Ffinlo particularly, we went to Parliament together, actually. We got a 6 inches of soil kind of convening, bringing some of the amazing people, and you chaired it fantastically. But never since that national security document came out in January, which the government had to, with pressure, which highlights and links food and biodiversity crisis, and is there. Every time I read your work, Ffinlo, I think, thank goodness you're just completely staying in that space, because we need that pressure. And I would hope that we support it, but ours is much more. So 6 Inches of Soil, one thing it's been acclaimed as a film is it is full of hope. So we know, we were told at one point by one environmentalist, well-known person, I'm not going to name him, that you actually have to scare the hell out of people and that they're not going to get on board. But then there are many other psychological studies, etc., that actually there's hope and there's guidance and there's some positive solutions. So obviously we framed it in this kind of, and we do this every single time, I think, with the podcast, is framing it, giving the true story, giving the negatives, the worrisome real picture in life. But we're bringing in people that unlock, as Richard said, for the average person going shopping, and I'm reaching for my cereal pack, and I'm we're trying to help them unlock that. And that's the feedback we've got. And some people have said, I've never even thought of it like that. So we're really trying to break it down, keep it simple, keep it quite exciting, keep it quite short as well. I sometimes get a bit, when I'm listening to things, my mind goes, but that's probably my mindless mind. But so by us trying to keep it a little bit, probably might feel a bit superficial at times, but we're really trying to just give those nuggets and allow people to inquire. And that's what we saw at the screenings, or we see still at 6 Inches of Soil screenings. We have incredible farmers or, politicians, doctors on our panels, and they take the subject a bit further, but you're also inviting the audience to keep exploring, keep learning, and keep pushing for more, and then giving them campaigns, etc., to follow. So I would say I've really enjoyed those conversations on our podcast, and adding some kind of slightly quirky aspects. And Richard brought in a classroom and slight child's voice, different voices, just to try and bring a kind of rounded, holistic approach, which is kind of, I come from a holistic therapy background. I still work in a cancer centre. So it's, for me, it's not just, what we eat, it's what our food ate as well. And I know, that's from David Montgomery and Ambically, but, those are the things we're sharing with everyone. We're trying to get everyone to think from an ecological point of view, a health point of view, and sort of nature point of view.
Yeah, and that's been a really something that I've loved about our pod is bringing the kids in. I've got a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old, and I try to get them to contribute questions, because it's really good when you have an expert in whatever their field is, pun intended. They will break it down in such a way that my 8-year-old or 10-year-old will understand the answer to the question. And that's a big part of why we do what we do at 6 Inches, is to try to make this knowledge accessible and understandable for people that aren't necessarily in the industry, but also help them, to Claire's point, realize that there's hope. This is possible. If you care about this stuff and you're not a farmer, then choosing what you put in your shopping trolley and shopping cart at the grocery store does make a big difference. That's been really a fun aspect about that.
Richard, could I just come back in on that agency thing? Because I think that's really important. And, often when I'm talking, I'm sort of talking about, big, scary issues. But I think it's really critical that there is agency. And, with Farmgate, it's it's not me there sort of saying, God, the world is a really difficult place. It's farmers talking about, or people within the food system, people within the natural capital world, talking about things that they are doing that solve things. And I think that's really critical. Scaring people only gets so far. It's creating the agency that people can unlock change. And just finally on that, so I can get off the whole security thing. Farmgate's putting on a conference in early September. It's the UK's first conference on food and national security. That's not food security. It's how food and food systems impact national security. So it's just, if people would like to know a bit more about that, then search us out.
Yeah, no, that's really important. But what about things that have gone wrong for you guys? We've had multiple recordings break down, and we've had some amazing guests on who just monologue for like half an hour, and it's really amazing to listen to, but also super hard to control. How about you, Ben? What have been some of your more amusing moments over your pod journey?
I was going to say, read both of those. I mean, definitely the technical side for anyone who makes a podcast, doesn't it? No matter whether you're making it in the field, whether you're using, we're recording on Riverside at the moment. Other online softwares are available. I reckon I think it didn't happen once. I think it happened twice, 2 early episodes. And this is a fairly classic one. Interviews that I was really, really pleased with, got to the end, and then realised that classic thing, you didn't press record. It hasn't happened in many years now, I'm glad to say, but that was painful. And on both occasions, I have to say, both the guests were brilliant. And actually, we did the whole thing again the day after. But so technical things have to be high up there, I think.
Definitely. We and as listeners will be unaware of this, but as Clay's out in the field and just randomly dropped off, because that's what happens when you're in the middle of the field surrounded by cattle and roosters and stuff like that. How about you, Clay? What have been some of your funnies that you've experienced?
Sure. So my phone overheated, shut down, had to reconnect. yeah, I had a couple of episodes early on that I recorded with an old school phone setup where you're recording phone calls. That's all I was getting done at that early stage. And some people, I mean, nobody knew anything about online really recording, Zoom and all that. Riverside didn't even exist. I didn't know it, but the recording software that I was using on my phone just deleted after a certain number of calls. It would delete the oldest ones. Well, those two got deleted, and I had to call those guys back and ask them to do it all over again. Similar thing, different technical issue. After 8.5 years, I think I've made every mistake, but I still find new ways to make new mistakes here and there. And so, yeah, it's it's one of my dad's friends in ranching, who's a second or third generation rancher at least, says the learning curve continues to be straight up. And I think that's probably true in podcasting as well.
Yeah, definitely. And that reminds me of the time where on one of our episodes on coffee, I was feeling a little bit ropey at the start of it, and live, we tried to reschedule this interview multiple times because the person we were interviewing was an Australian, but he was out in Japan. It was the other side of the world, and we'd rescheduled, and we were just going for it. And I could feel myself getting like sicker and sicker. And after about 15 minutes, my wife, Annie, was next to me, and I put it on mute. I was like, I'm just about to pass out, and you're going to have to take over this interview. And so we turned the camera off, and I kind of like collapsed on the floor and dragged myself out of the room. And the next thing, the camera was on, and my wife, Annie, was the host. And so, yeah, that happened. If you want to go back and listen to that was definitely up there with disaster moments. But what about you, Ffinlo? Have you had any good, funny moments?
I mean, I've had all those moments. I mean, not the crawling out on the floor moment, but I've certainly had those moments where you forget to press record, and it's always
it's a rite of passage, Ffinlo, isn't it?
It's mortifying, and you say you've left it behind. I haven't left it behind. It still happens every now and then. I have so many signs that I have around me, that I take out of boxes and just record until I've done it, and they can go away. And of course, with Farmgate, because I do lots of pre-interviewing, and often it's sort of quite structured, the conversations to an extent. I'm sort of talking through the auto cue as I am now, and I've got smile, on a post-it there, because I just have to keep remembering that this is on video as well, and I can't look quite so serious and miserable all the time. But I did have a podcast, and usually things go to plan. And even if I'm a bit worried and it's somebody who's kind of a really big name, things generally go to plan. But I had Dieter Helm, the UK economist, and Patrick Holden, the sort of spokesman from the Sustainable Food Trust, sort of the voice of organic farming in the UK. And my God, they kind of just went at each other, and I didn't get a word in edgeways for 40 minutes in the space of the hour. And Patrick was clearly wanting to get in the whole time, and Dieter was talking and talking and talking. And I just got to the end of it and thought, well, I could just ditch it, but they've spent the time, so I put it out anyway, and I'm sure it was an interesting listen, but it certainly didn't go to plan.
Yeah, that's excellent. Yeah, we've definitely had episodes like that. We had a coffee one with two very powerful, passionate women from the States and from Costa Rica, and it was the same thing. Like, I just kind of sat back and let them just like explode their passion into the microphone, and it was actually a really good episode, but I had zero control of the narrative.
Yeah, so it's just your coffee episodes. It's just your coffee episodes that are a problem, then, Richard? Is that the case?
All of the episodes are problematic, Claire, if you dig into them, for sure. How about you, Abby?
Well, it's not funny, but one of the things that we always are kind of proud of at Farmerama is that one of our original contributors, Nigel, is an indie farmer online. He met his now wife as a Farmerama contributor. So they met through Farmerama wedding. That always makes us happy. Hannah. Incredible. Yeah. So they are in East Sussex. Yeah. Still farming together today, which is so nice. And then I guess, actually, my reflections are kind of behind the scenes in that Farmerama, Joe, the person who I started Farmerama with, Joe Barrett, he was a podcaster already before. We were already making podcasts about other things before we started making Farmerama. And so he gave me tips on how to get good quality recordings. This was back in 2015. And the main thing was to go under the duvet in your bedroom and record your bit. So I've spent a lot of time under the duvet recording, which no one can see because we don't do any video. And it wouldn't be very effective video. But yeah.
Yeah, the under the duvet video recording is a different niche.
Yeah, I think so.
It's certainly a different video niche.
Yes.
Has to be said. Yeah. Although I think I'm going to have to take away that format of farming blind date. That sounds like a really good idea.
Yeah, it does. It really does. So how about what feedback are you guys getting? I mean, from your audiences, your friends, your family, how do you feel it's going out there? And also what do you feel is missing? The way that we operate at 6 Inches, I'll chat with my wife and get her to listen and, get some really good feedback of, oh yeah, that's actually quite an obvious thing we're maybe missing, getting too technical, things like that. But what have been your experiences there? Ben, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, what's missing? I think it's not actually a question that I know. I actually know the answer of at the moment. It's something that, again, going back to, I think I said much earlier on, that podcasting itself just moves so rapidly. I'm off to the podcast show in London next week, and I just know I live in fear that they're going to tell me of another thing that we're going to have to innovate into in the next year. But so that's a really interesting question. But I think it completely depends, doesn't it, on your particular show. And actually, what I found interesting, actually working on different shows with different audiences. You mentioned the technical thing there. So, for example, I produced one show for the Sustainable Control of Parasites group, part of the National Sheep Association. I love doing this show because we have a farmer, a vet, and a parasitologist in each episode, and we get really geeky on parasites. And that's very, very techy, a very, very specific, very incredibly specific audience, and something that will work with that audience. Well, I could put out a similar episode on Meet the Farmers, which is maybe more narrative based for people more interested in long-term stories, and that might not work quite so well. But I think it's really important, actually, as a podcaster, to sometimes be a bit selfish as well in terms of what you want to put out, because you put so much time into this and you build this connection with your audience that actually, after a while, learn to trust your gut as well in terms of what material you want to put out. And sometimes some things work and sometimes things don't, but that's all part of the learning process, I think.
Yeah. And what do you find the most engaging ways that have worked for you to get people to discover you? Because that's, I think, at 6 Inches, well, for Claire and I, that's one of our biggest challenges. Is I think the stuff we're putting out is really strong, and we're interviewing some amazing people, but also no one really knows we exist yet. I was curious, what's worked for all of you guys. Ffinlo, how have you managed to reach out to listeners?
I would love to know. I would love to know. I mean, I all the way through this, there's a degree, Ben sort of talking about that sometimes you need to be selfish and do things that you find interesting. Well, that's all I've ever done. I make programs. I talk to people that I think are going to be interesting. I have conversations that I'm interested in. Sometimes other people are really interested in those conversations. Sometimes they're less interested. I don't use social media that much. I just rely on word of mouth. And apart from LinkedIn and LinkedIn, because it's a peer-to-peer, professional-to-professional network, I find that really sticky and people are really good there. But you also asked what's missing, and to me the answer is just very straightforward, and it's money. There is a huge amount of money out there in farming if you are really into big tech solutions. If you're into really strong fertilizers and massive tractors, there's money all over the place. When you're talking about knowledge exchange, which actually is where regenerative agriculture is, we don't need loads of great big tech to have fantastic food and farming. We just need knowledge to be exchanged and people to sort of talk to each other about their own successes and what they're doing, and that's really difficult to fund. And some years it's more straightforward, but frankly, since Trump got in America, and actually probably since Labour got in the UK, and people have been much more nervous about where their money's coming from in terms of sponsorship, it's just become much more difficult, much more hand to mouth. And so while the audiences are there, the audiences continue to grow, it's getting the money in so that we can afford to do these things, which is a real challenge.
Yeah. And well, let's talk a bit more about that, because that's definitely something like Claire and I mostly, I mean, ours is a very low cost pod, but we're definitely struggling to kind of break even at best. It's kind of like a passion project, which we do in the evenings and weekends. But how have you found that, Finn? I mean, you touched on it a bit there. I mean, is this something, and I feel like you don't have to share any of this, like I don't want to see your bank balance, but it's really curious to understand, like, is this profitable or is it, are you losing money? If you're able to talk about that, it'd be really interesting.
We're only able to make 3 million a year these days, and I struggle to live on that. I can't heat my swimming pool. No, it's difficult, and so Farmgate, as I haven't said, is part of 8.9.com. It's a number 8, the word point, the number 9.com, and that's a news channel. So we moved from think tank to news channel because we felt that probably we could have more interesting conversations and actually be more influential as a news channel, which I think has probably proved to be the case. But what we do is we work on sponsorship, and that means that sometimes we have companies or groups that are interested in sponsoring the channel as a whole. So First Milk, we're very supportive. We're currently being sponsored by Friarsmore Livestock Health and others, and so that gives us channel sponsorship, which means that the work I'm doing on the podcast is sort of cross-subsidized and so on. And other times it might be a series where we go out and we try and get several different people or companies together to sponsor a series like we did on our Filling the Funding Gap, which was a big series on natural capital that we did last year. So smaller amounts of money from lots of different companies. And then, every now and then we might have an individual podcast episode that's sponsored. And by and large, those are, these are things that I've been interested in. These are things I want to make a podcast about. And I've then gone out to people. But occasionally, somebody will come along and say, have you thought about doing this? And, we'd be interested in paying for it. And sometimes I'll say, no, I really don't fancy that. But other times I'll think, do you know what? That sounds really interesting. And so, in that way, it's a combination of different things. The channel is getting sponsorship. Sometimes it's the podcast getting sponsorship. But, together, we're just about managing to eke it through the year and, buy Christmas presents for the kids.
Yeah. Clay, I mean, you and I have spoken about this. We've got an amazing gallery of clips and sound bites from all of these thought leaders. It would be really interesting to go out there on the road and speak to that and just pack all of these clips into presentations to help educate the farming community, the food community, the processing, milling community. How does money work for you? I know you're close with Understanding Ag, right? Are they kind of like your main sponsor?
Yeah, they were. They are. We've since that relationship is dissolved. But yeah, so that was kind of the. I've heard people say if you podcast for 3 years, it'll change your life financially. Like you can make money doing this. It took me like 6 or more years to get to the point where it was actually generating revenue. So I'm just a little slow, I guess, but that's fine. It's very similar to Ffinlo's model. We do some custom branded content here and there. We do some sponsorships throughout the episodes, individual episodes themselves. One of the best ways was with a studio sponsor. Started out with C90 Ocean Minerals as a studio sponsor when I was in charge of finding my own sponsors, and then had a relationship with Understanding Ag for a couple of years. And so, yeah, that's been good where they kind of get mentioned on every episode. That was a helpful relationship for sure. I think that's my experience has been very similar to Ffinlo's, and it's been a good journey. But for me, it was a continuing education. It was free or even modestly paid continuing education for me for the first number of years, where I was just I grew up in agriculture, but I didn't like it, and so I didn't pay attention. I didn't ask questions. Dad said put a fence post there, I put a fence post there. Dad said go move that group of cows over there. I did that. I didn't know why. I was just doing what I was told to do, and so I knew which end the feed went in and which end the manure came out, but I didn't really know much else about agriculture beyond that. And so I have been trying to educate myself over the last 8.5 years about how to do it in a way, as I said earlier, that is profitable, not just financially, but profitable for the land, the animals, and the people. And so that's been kind of my journey, is trying to learn for myself these things.
Yeah. And totally. And it's obviously the profitability aspect is critical for the guests as well as, for us to continue doing it. Abby, I know one thing that we're certainly at 6 inches and most of you do is we try to bring light to problems that people don't necessarily know they have. Do you feel like we're getting to a place where people are paying more attention to farming practices and to the food that they're consuming?
I think definitely that our listenership has gone up. Our audience has increased over time, and it feels like from 10 years ago, there's much more interest in what we're doing. And this refers back to your question about how do you get more listeners to the podcast. To me, it's like noticing that new niches are coming in. So like the architecture world, for example, has become much more involved in the farming world. And to me, that's a real niche to speak to. And to understand, or the fashion world has, gradually become more and more interested in understanding, oh, wow, actually, we are intimately linked to the farming world. If we want to be remotely resilient and sustainable in any way, we have to rely on natural fibers, not just the petrochemical industry to supply us. It's been interesting to see the different, the dawning of the links to the land across these many different industries. And I don't know who's next, but the most recent one for me was noticing just so many more people in architecture coming and asking questions and being interested, listening to the show. So I think in that sense, yes, more people are learning and being interested. Of course, there's a lot more people to go. And maybe if there's time, I can just elaborate on that niche thing. I was invited to some one of the largest PR marketing agencies in the world. They host kind of events in other countries, and they bring together lots of people, some of their customers, and then people who are doing things different. And Farmerama was considered one of those things. So I went along. But I got some of the best insights of my life into how to do marketing PR and to expand audiences, particularly around podcasting. And the main insight there was just that the way to build audiences is through niches. And actually part of, serial series was about okay, well, let's focus in on a niche that we know about, and go for it and go deep. And that those listeners will then come on board for the other shows. And we did see that, our normal monthly shows are much broader in scope, but we found our listener numbers went up across the board. And for many, many years continuing. So I think that's a helpful insight is where are these kind of niche industries, niches of people who are coming in, and how can we speak really to them, to a depth that means that they're drawn in, and then they get the farming bug, and then they want to hear all the stuff, which is the outcome that we desire, really.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting in terms of regenerative farming and talking to all the experts we've been lucky to meet. I've found that many people who I speak to, especially here in the States, live in very remote areas with small grocery stores or markets. And I often find that those farmers, if you go into their kitchen, into their pantry, a lot of the products are not coming from the system that they're growing from, which is always really interesting to me, just because it's very difficult because I live here in Austin, Texas, and I'm surrounded by 5 or 6 grocery stores, all who stock all of the things. But once you go into the countryside, that changes pretty quickly. Do you find that your guests are finding it difficult to practice what they preach in terms of, are they buying the food from the systems that they're growing from? And how's been Ben? How do you feel about that? Because you've also spoken to some amazing farmers, but also who probably live in remote areas. Do you think they've got that same connection to the food?
That's a really good question. And it's a question that I occasionally ask, depending on who they are. I think it's one of those things is how long is a piece of string? And I think it's a very sort of personal thing for each person, isn't it? But I would argue that I think that just, and I'm speaking as a society here in the UK, I think we've got a long way to go before actually we embed any sort of food culture back within our lives. I think it doesn't nearly, and I'm speaking myself here. It's something that I love to cook. I love to be around others and share food. But it's time. Again, bringing it back to podcasting, actually, and bringing it back to farming as well. Time is perhaps as a currency of our times, I argue that it should be far more valuable than it is maybe perceived to be. And actually, until we actually allow for this argument that we can allow more time in our lives, allow more time to allow more time for food culture, and that's perhaps within the way we talk about it within the ag space as well. Then I think we're not really going to shift the dial as quickly as we perhaps should, and perhaps as much as we would need.
Do you know, I think it's really difficult, Richard, to eat well in the countryside in the UK, bizarrely. And I'm really aware of this as a podcast host, that if I lived in London, it would be so much easier. Dalston Market or Borough Market, there are so many food markets there, that are bringing food actively in from outside. Whereas in the countryside here, most of the farming that is surrounding where I am, not all of it, but a lot of it is part of the problem rather than the solution. We have lots of flooding issues here because of the way that those fields are farmed. And if I want to get food, I have to go to Tesco because, there isn't really anything else. There is a farm shop or two, but they are open at quite specific times and they're really expensive in comparison to other things. So there is this real disconnect there. So not so much whether the farmers themselves are practicing what they preach, but it's difficult for me to practice what I preach. And I have to be completely honest. I'm not wildly interested in food, in meals myself. I'm not a big foodie. I like Monster Munch, but my family, especially my kids, they love cooking, and so that's a way of keeping me honest. But it's going out, finding the odd bit in the wild, going to the farm shop, occasionally, but mostly it's just going to Waitrose, going to Tesco, and that's a crying shame.
Right. I heard a guy recently say that when you start going about trying to get food and eat from the system that you're growing for, I think is how you phrased it, Richard, that you really just recreate the hunter-gatherer lifestyle, that you have to go out and find all the food, and meet people in back alleys and dark corners sometimes because it's maybe not even legal to get the food the way you want to get it. And that's an interesting place we find ourselves.
Yeah, I love that. And Abby, you alluded to that a lot on that episode about grains and cereals and what you're allowed to do and not allowed to do. So that's totally right, Clay. And sorry, Ben, what were you going to say?
No, I was just also going to bring in just the whole issue of food poverty, rural poverty as well is a whole layer of conversation that I don't think, and I'm speaking purely on the podcast that I've worked on, that I don't think it's a subject that I cover enough. I mean, this was out today. Just had a Meet the Farmers big debate focused on Wales, and there we were talking about up to a third of children in Wales are living in relative income poverty, and that itself is the context as well that we have to see food, that we have to see our wider conversations.
I think I'd like to add, I do worry sometimes, and we say it at screenings and on the pod, it's really, really fine for us to say, I can dip in. I've got a farmer near who occasionally has a cow available that we get bits from. My friend has pigs, whatever. But the reality is completely different. And we are looking at future projects where we're trying to look at how you get good food to everyone. And it's tough as hell because people always talk about procurement and all of these things, but we're a million miles away from it at the moment. We don't have it at the top, as Ffinlo, and all of you dig into in policy, etc., and the support. So it's not there at all. And we just always have to be so careful that we don't come in with our glorious ideas. And that's where we have so many NGOs in this country trying to do that thing. And they're the ones half the time who are picking up the pieces. I was with a woman on Wednesday, an amazing discussion for soil to gut conversation with nutritional therapists there. And there's a woman there who works with young, like youth clubs, like kids who are really kind of in between the system, really hardcore in London. And she's teaching them to cook and bringing food and trying to get their minds in. But this is not the normal gentle school, primary school thing. This is not even, home ec or whatever. This is proper hardcore going into these youth clubs and trying to make a difference because there's so much there's just they would think food can bring the communities together, and these are the stories to bring in as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's so important. And just to add on to that, I did a road trip a couple of years ago with my son, and we went to go visit all of the farms featured in Roots So Deep that you referenced earlier, Ffinlo. And it was really interesting because we had to stay in the local, motels and things near the farms. And where did they go to get their groceries from? Like Dollar General, which is, if you're not in the US, they're everywhere, but they're definitely, not expensive places to go shopping. They would specialize in the cheapest possible food from industrial sources. And they, even if they would have to be driving an hour and a half out of their way to go and access the food that they were actually growing, that definitely struck me on my experience on that road trip. Well, look, I want to be conscious of everyone's time. We're nearly at the end here. I wondered if you guys had closing thoughts you wanted to leave the listeners with, and also obviously remind them of your podcast and how they can find you and things like that. So, Ben, do you want to go first?
Oh, closing thoughts. I'm gonna put a request out there to farmers actually to think about farming storytelling and storytellers. It can take a lot of time. It can take a lot of motivation sometimes at times to really dig deep and almost reinvent the ways that you tell stories, because if you look at a farming year, it can look in some ways the same every year, but actually how do you reinvent those stories? So for anyone involved in food and farming, think about the ways that you tell your stories, and be positive as well, because there's lots of reasons in the world why we're told to be down, but think positive.
And Ben, remind listeners, so your podcast channels and things, how do they find you?
Yeah, no, thank you. So you could find Meet the Farmers podcast wherever you get your podcasts, or you can search for our other work at ruralpodmedia.co.uk.
Awesome. And how about you, Clay?
Yeah, I think that if we're willing to look at agriculture as a business and run it as a business and focus on making decisions that are good for the business, that will lead us down paths of reducing inputs, relying on soil health, and managing people really, really well. And when we can manage our people really well, then I think, have a more fulfilling lifestyle as an agriculturalist. And so that would be my encouragement, is to look at it as a business, focus on the business side of it, do that really well, reduce the inputs, focus on soil health, and the people will become a lot more fulfilled in the long run, I think, as well. And those relationships will just get stronger and stronger over time. As far as where to find the podcast, ranchingpodcast.com has all 500 and some odd episodes that we've produced over the 8.5 years that I've been doing this. So ranchingpodcast.com.
Yeah. Ffinlo?
I said before that, food is something that really is, for me, is largely fuel. I don't stop during the day. I just eat a lot of toast, and so I need to listen to those Cereals podcasts again. I get the calories, but what really matters to me is how that food is produced, because how that food is produced, whether it's the toast that I'm eating or whether it's the fantastic meals that the rest of my family are producing for themselves, that really, it literally means the world in terms of the future. And so if people are looking for the work that we do, there are plenty of podcasts which are just me interviewing sometimes individual people on our Leaders series, often having groups of farmers sort of talking about the way that they've come into regenerative agriculture. But we also have other programs on the channel. We have a regular, which we used to call Wheat from the Chaff, but I've dropped the name, and we just have a quote from the program these days. But that's, another couple of hosts on there with me, and that's our sort of current affairs show. And we have another program as well called Martin's Farm, which is with Martin Lyons, who runs the Nature Friendly Farming Network. And we talk about things that are going on his farm in the course of that coming month, and then other things that are happening in that sort of nature-friendly farming world. So if people want to give us a try and they haven't yet, then Farmgate is the name of the podcast. It's on, as Ben said, all good podcast channels, and and our news channel is 8.9.com. As I said before, that's the number 8, the word point, the number 9.com, and we have lots of additional news stories on there that aren't connected to the podcast, that are just part of the farming world, the food world, the current affairs of food and farming in the UK and often internationally as well. So although we're largely a UK podcast these days, we have a lot of international guests, and we do have an international focus too.
And how about you, Abby?
My closing thoughts are, I think one thing maybe I didn't mention at all, but it is really important to us, is Farmerama is very much about sharing underrepresented voices. And to me, much of the farming community is often that. But then there's people within the farming community, or the land-based community, let's call it, that are even less well represented. And so I think, continuing to do that. One of the things I love about podcasting is allowing those voices to come through into your ears. And it's just like, wow, it brings something to life. And it's a communication that I just don't get in other mediums. So I just wanted to highlight that. I think the opportunity that we really love at Farmerama also is diving deep into some of the questions that are kind of behind these. We were talking about food poverty, or poverty more generally is the truth. But, why are people not able to access good quality food at a fair price? And I would say, like, for example, the series that we did called Landed, it's asking, are family farms a colonial concept? But actually, when you dig into that question, you start to come up with some of the understanding of why do family farms struggle so much? Why do they need to price their food at the prices they have to price them at? There's some big, meaty questions we can get into. And so I think at Farmerama, we really enjoy going there and taking the risk. It's often risky to ask some of those questions. But as long as we do it in a non-judgmental way, it's not saying anyone's wrong or right, just looking into the questions. I think we can have some powerful conversations. So those are some of my reflections. And in terms of finding us, Farmerama, it's spelled farmer and then AMA. If you type that in on any podcasting channel, you'll find us. Or our website is farmerama.co. And on our website, you can actually go on, and we just, as I said, we released Cereal Revisited just last month. And on the website, you can go and see that we have a digital sound map, which has got lots of different voice recordings from people sent in all over the world who were somehow affected by cereal, and what they're doing now and how it's changed their lives. So that's quite fun to just hear these little snippets from people, if you want to access that.
And if you want to meet your future husband or wife, also get in touch with Abby. She's very welcome.
I'm on it.
How about you, Claire? What are your kind of closing thoughts and reflections?
Well, I just really wanted to thank you all. And I hope that we can collaborate. I do really believe in collaboration. And I think I wanted to ask you all really who your specific audiences were. And I think we've kind of unearthed that. I think you've all explained. But I hope that we all complement each other. And I think for anyone listening, is that there's so much space for, there's too much out there for us all to digest. But I do think podcasting is a really amazing way of listening, of learning. I was listening to an amazing thing on Radio 4 the other day, and it was Ffinlo. I don't know if you guys, it was The Journey Through the Cow, most astounding journalist. And it really, it just went straight into my heart and my whole body. And I was thinking, if we can start to produce stuff like that, which actually Farmerama has sort of provided for me, and you can have those really reflective moments in your ears, and you can just almost close your eyes and use no other senses. I just hope can carry on. I hope that we're doing it once a month, amongst other things. And Richard, we are serious, aren't we? You made us sound like we're not really, but we do have an amazing editor, by the way. It's not just Richard and I who saves our bacon when it's all a bit fluffy and a bit weird. But I hope that we can all be there for each other, because I see that in the farming community that we are communicating in the small food businesses that we're communicating in the kind of environmentalists, etc. Everyone is, their heart is so big and they give so much. So I hope that, we can carry on, all of us, doing that together as well. By when Ffinlo came with us into the space in Parliament, when I been with Ben and Abby at events, and there's so much to learn. Let's all keep learning together and share and support. I think is what I want to say in this very broken world.
Yeah, definitely. I was texting the other day with Will and Jenny Harris down in Bluffton, Georgia, and Jenny texted me back a line. She said, "All ships will rise from this tide, and we're just grateful to still have a boat in the water." I thought that was quite a sweet little quote. But just to leave you, before I started on this podcast journey, and Claire and I were kind of coming up with the concept of it, and I briefly told the story before, but I mentioned to a really close friend of mine that I was wanting to start a podcast, and he paused and he looked at me in the eye and he goes, "Are you having a midlife crisis?" Well, I am. I'm deep in that crisis and I'm loving it. It's been great. I've loved getting to listen to all of your podcasts, get to meet you. I love the idea that we're kind of all in this together and we can help each other out. So thank you for agreeing to come together for this, genuinely. And thanks for all the work you're doing to all of you. And Soil Mates, I hope you've enjoyed listening to this special episode, and we will see you guys soon. Thank you so much.
Very good stuff there. Really appreciate the opportunity to join them and to hear their perspective and to be challenged by their perspective and the way they're thinking about these things. There was more to that episode. There was an introduction that I didn't share with you. And there was also a lengthy interview with another legendary UK journalist on these issues of food and farming and some of those things. So I encourage you to go check out the whole episode, and I will include a link in the show notes page for that today at workingcows.net/526. Very, very excited to share with you conversation that I had recently, next on the Working Cows podcast, with Daniel Unruh. And Daniel was a guest when we talked to the guys from the Ranch Rolodex podcast. Now, the Ranch Rolodex podcast is continuing to crank out great content on a bi-weekly basis every other Wednesday. And so they've got another episode coming out next Wednesday. And that would be the 19th, I believe, is their planned release date for that. And it's a conversation with the wives of the guys from the Ranch Rolodex podcast. And so, but we're going to talk to Daniel, kind of flesh out his story and how he's gone about getting started. Now, I think he's got a unique story, and I really want to share it. And I see the desire for this content. I mean, this was I think the most viral piece of content I ever created. The most viral piece of content that ever came from something that was from the podcast. I've shared other pictures and things that went viral, but this one was the most viral piece of content. It was Daniel talking about kind of, what do you need to get started? And he's like, the industry and kind of our paradigm tells us we need a lot more than we actually do. And so I wanted to dive back in on that and say, hey, what did that look like? How did you actually go about doing that and having and getting started? So I'm looking forward to sharing that conversation with you. We've got conversations scheduled with the rest of the crew there at the Ranch Rolodex podcast as well. I just want to help them boost them as they're getting started with this, because I think they're great guys with a great vision and a great target for what they're trying to accomplish with their podcast. So look forward to sharing my conversation with Daniel Unruh with you, coming your way real soon on another episode of the Working Cows podcast. We'll see you then.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.